You, we're gonna
Yeah,
do
so I was part of Team Housing right there.
team housing.
Yeah,
Good.
Team Housing. Yeah, and so housing's a big issue right now, and so we largely focused on the capital repair backlog that the city has, which is about $860 million for its 60,000 units. And so that's a big problem that faces a lot of residents, and you know, the city's not always as good of a landlord as it should be. And so we came up with two things. One's a kind of longer term ask in terms of having better data for housing and so on, so that we can do more things with that. So that's a more kind of, you know, that will involve...
Sorry, guys, 1 second. This facilitator head here, I can't hear, and I was wondering if you're talking, if you can go over there, would be super helpful. Happy to have you continue, but okay, go ahead.
And so that will involve speaking to the city in terms of getting more data on things like the various line items for the kinds of repairs that they have in terms of how many elevators get broken down, putting them in a uniform format, and breaking them down by cost, the date that happens, the date that particular complaint was filed, the location of it, the date that it was fixed, with the potential to build some kind of open and transparent queue for all of these for that backlog, so that people can see where their complaint is, how long it takes to fix an elevator or a doorknob or whatever. So hopefully that shines some light on TCHC to put more effort into it, and provides a tool and resource for tenants in order to evaluate, you know, where they are online, and to provide some kind of analytical framework to see how TCHC is doing in terms of, you know, whether they are responding in a reasonable time, and so on and so forth. The other thing that we can do for Saturday is a more short-term thing in terms of mapping out TCHC properties, how much the capital repair backlog per property is, getting things like the number of tenants per unit and other things like that. And so from that through, we only touched on the kind of format that we would use from a technology perspective, but to visualize where those problems are, how they relate to the community, what those needs are, and should we complete that portion, then we can kind of add some more layers to it. We can relate it to data that the city has in terms of some things like health outcomes, in terms of education, to see what kind of correlation there is in terms of how these buildings are maintained, how they relate to the neighborhood, how people are doing, and things like that.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
Nice.
That was Team Housing.
Very nice. Before you go, I'm just going to let them ask. Anybody have any questions before we let David off the hook here?
Questions?
Questions? Anybody? Anybody? See you tomorrow. This is.
Yeah, I was just interested, I'm thinking about Wellbeing Toronto, the
Yeah.
site, and there's housing data on there as one of the parameters. Is that the type of data that's of value to what you're looking at? Or?
Yeah, that's the kind of data, but we want to find the kind of closer correlations and so on, and so we probably would play around with that. That hasn't been determined, and so should you have knowledge of that of that data and how to use it well, then yeah.
You can help.
We would welcome you on Team Housing.
Nice.
Yeah,
And you have a follow-up.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask about it, this is a separate organization. I'm not familiar with it, I'm sorry, but this is a separate agency, but it's funded by the city, correct?
Yeah, so TCHC is an arm's length, they are an arm's length agency, and so they have their own organizational structure and so on, and they report back to the city, much like the police do. And the ultimate owner is the city, but they work separate from that. So there is some kind of organizational distance. So in terms of getting data, we would still have to kind of, we spoke with one person from the city's open data team in terms of coming up with a list of asks to speak with them to try and make things a bit more accessible for us.
So here's one of the things that I'm thinking is that, there's lots of people that use 311. Here's a service request, pothole being fixed. Okay, instead of a pothole being fixed, I have a wall that needs to be fixed. Why aren't we using the same technology? Because the 311 data, after it's compiled and that, is made open. So you were talking about making the repair information open. Why don't we apply the same process and technology to that?
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be something to look into. I don't know how easy that would be in terms of whether TCHC would be open to that.
Yeah.
But, that would be great.
Yeah, good.
But some information will be missing because in our
Go for it.
backlog list that we want transparent, we want also a commitment by the municipality, by the organization, to tell when they repair. Because when it's made public, they have to respect. The waiting list, if somebody jump on that, we want the justification. We want to build trust between the tenants and the organization.
Right.
Have you spoken to the Toronto Housing about where and what they're collecting as far as that data is concerned now? Because I would think that the way it's probably being run is that if I have a problem with a hole in my wall, I contact the super in my building. He puts it onto his list and fixes it according to whatever. Maybe he has resources internal, or has to bring in resources external, has to budget, has to speak to somebody about that kind of stuff. And it may not even be consistent, or probably isn't consistent across sites. So you have some large buildings with on-site people who are tracking that kind of stuff, and then people are going out to the individual houses to do all that kind of stuff. If you're going to spend the weekend hacking away at this, first you've got to come up with the specifications for the data that you want and the database that you want to start tracking this, because I wouldn't guarantee that Toronto Housing has it already.
Right, and I think that was why the initial thing was a longer term.
Exactly.
It's a longer term thing, but it's very good advice, to be aware of that stuff. Okay, so one more.
We actually did come up with a list of parameters that we want to fill.
Perfect, so we'll make sure we get a